Hey y'all, long time no see. It's definitely been a hot minute, and happy holidays if you celebrate. Today I'll be going over how to beat the various knights this Anomaly Arbitration, as well as the King, Sunday, or Septimus. As always, this slideshow, as well as any timestamps you might need, are down in the description. There's also the spreadsheet down below containing a bunch of sample clears, as well as a Google form if you'd like to add your own submissions. With that out of the way, let's begin. Night 1 is, for lack of words, a straightforward test of survival, somewhat like Night 3 back when Lygus was around. It features 2 rounds of 2 elites, all of which actually have more HP than the bosses of this mode. As such, surviving their onslaught of attacks becomes really difficult, especially when you factor in that this stage throws nearly every type of damage at you. The Ascended has single target, blast, bounce, and dot attacks, as well as a massive HP reduction if you leave it alive for too long. The Cyclonic Swarm Mother deals massive AoE damage if left unchecked, while its children threaten massive single target onslaughts. And on top of that, each hit gradually chips away at your max HP thanks to the stage debuff. You'll really want a sustain that can deal with a mix of anything and a whole lot of everything. Shielders like Dan are a bit harder to justify, since you'd rather save them for a certain later stage. Archetypes that can spam frequent attacks to advance the Mother, the tankier of the 2 elites, and slowly whittle away at her max HP, are best suited for this game mode. Note that follow-ups don't count. Sorry, Fei Xiao and Tribi. Not only will frequent non-follow-ups chip away at the Mother's max HP, somewhat like a weaker war armor, but they'll also advance it and cause it to act prematurely. Remembrance, Counter, and Dot archetypes can abuse this quite well, since some portion of damage is locked behind enemies taking their turns. When it's all said and done though, this fight is just about as straightforward of a damage race as it gets. How fast can your team plow through a semi-blast scenario for elite fight while weathering the constant damage that comes their way? With this being the most straightforward of the knights, and as such the hardest if trying to play to this stage's gimmicks, I'd highly recommend bringing your strongest damage dealer here, even if it means a slightly worse matchup versus other stages. All of the elites share lightning and ice weaknesses, with fire and physical being just behind, so DPS of those elements gain a significant advantage versus this stage. Top answers will also have some way to play around the constant damage this stage threatens, with Phynon uniquely advancing the Cyclone Mother without relying on hit counts for more max HP chip, Break disabling the elite's threatening attacks, and Dot and HP drain teams taking hits and dishing them back. Despite the Ascended's 40% win res, Blade is quite the comfy clear versus this stage with how often damage comes his way, so I definitely recommend using him if you're low on options, especially should you lack any of the Amphoreus units to use here. Sustain-wise, this stage has Hyacine's name written all over it, with the requirements being able to handle a mix of single target, AoE, and dots to cleanse. The 5-star men all work pretty well if you don't have Rider at your disposal, though honestly I'd recommend Luocha the most out of them if you still need a shielder versus Ichor, especially if running a counter or other attack spam team. Lingsha is nice for break teams here of course, and her sustain should be able to keep up just fine, but she is just slightly less safe compared to her other premium healers, especially when you consider that Gallagher has a single target attack down debuff and still struggles to keep his team alive here a lot of the time. As for supports, really just pick whoever fits best within your niche. Try and build them as tanky and as fast as possible so they can help with the stage's sustain and attack requirement. Both MCs are quite strong here, so I can honestly say to pick whatever playstyle your account is best suited to. Just be aware that you can only choose one MC and for only one night stage. Like every other Anomaly Arbitration before it, Night 1 is our designated not all enemies come out at one stage. There are 4 elites in total, with the last 2 spawning in 50% advanced. As for summons, the kids also spawn 75% advanced and aren't really all that slow themselves, so keep that in mind that killing and advancing an elite opens you up to a new turn of more damage. Stat check wise, yeah, they literally double the elite's HP compared to the last MOC appearance they were in, and the number of them to make up for a lack of wave 2. With a collective 14.5 million HP or more to chew through, this is by far the tankiest stage, especially so if running a Wind DPS. Starting with the Cyclonic Swarm Mother, every 4 non-follow-up hits, as mentioned before, will advance its action by 100%, just like a Lady of Crashing Waves. Both it and the Mother have a regular attacking turn 1, and a turn 2 with a countdown-based spawning mechanic that also comes with damage reduction. However, unlike the Lady, who takes 70% of damage applied to it as dot every advance, the Mother instead summons 2 Mirage Fizzle Kids with reduced max HP and defense, The countdown also gets delayed a little bit whenever that happens. Oh, and when the countdown hits, the mother immediately gets to act, spawning 4 full HP kids, with a shield that blocks 1 instance of non-dot damage, minus however many kids it prematurely spawned before then. In other words, you're seeing those tiny abominations, either sooner when they're weaker, or later when they're at their full power. After this point, every time it acts, it will launch a big AoE, over and over, until its kids are all gone. Only after this point is the damage reduction removed. And of course, the kids don't just stand there either. The first one locks onto a target, and then all the other ones focus it down, kinda like, say, how Scarasabaz's stings work. Not to mention that they do double damage to locked on targets, so killing them should really be your priority whenever they're around. Suffice to say, it's a lot to manage. The Ascended, thankfully, is less of a headache mechanics-wise. All her attacks have a 100% base chance to inflict a stackable wind shear that lasts for 3 turns, stacks up to 5 times, and packs quite the punch, so cleanses go a long way. Its first turn, like the mother's, is a single target followed by a blast attack. Its second turn is a 5-hit bounce followed by a charge, after which it lowers everyone's max HP by 30% and performs another single target attack. Note that you can cleanse this max HP reduction like you would any debuff. Definitely a lower priority focus this fight, but don't leave it around for too long if you can. Moving on to Night 2, the faster you can kill this stage, the less annoying gimmicks you have to deal with. This ranges from the elites, who have threatening attacks but take a while to get going, to the summons, who inflict AoE damage and stacking vuln upon their own death, to even the stage debuff, where the lower HP an enemy gets, the harder it gets to crit down. As such, DPS that don't need to spread out their damage and can instead deal it in concentrated bursts are generally best. If running a non-crit DPS, you don't have to worry about the debuff, but for those that do, make sure you have multiple sources of crit damage on the team in some way, be it via characters, light cones, or relic sets, to make those crits not completely fizzle out. Broken Keel is a not-so-secret sleeper pick for those in the know, as 10 to 30% crit damage across all your team members goes a long way when you can lose up to 300% of it. Breaking is really valuable to this stage, especially when looking at the slow but dangerous Wave 1, and some level of splash damage to deal with mobs certainly helps too. As such, break DPS are naturally the best, though self-implants like Anax and Phynon have, and raw damage like Evernight and Mighty possess, do the job just fine too. Now that we have 2 break supports with AoE attacks, Hunt March has seen a massive rise in viability along with Boothill, letting her focus on single target bosses to the point where I think she's a legit DPS recommendation if you don't have any of the premium options, but do have the break supports. Shrei is also a fun 4-star option versus an all quantum weak stage if you've been itching to use her. This stage is by far the least strict on sustain requirements, as while there are technically CCs, they happen much later, and are better prevented by just neutralizing the threat before the problem turns up. Breaking is also good at pushing this timer back, so the ideal sustain might also have this in their kit. Especially when considering opportunity cost, this is easily Gallagher's best use case, standing alongside the usual premium version 3 sustains, though Lingsha works wonders here as the main DPS too. Otherwise, just pick whichever sustain you like. If there's one support who stands over the rest, it has to be the Dahlia, just because you can insert about any halfway decent breaker with her and call it a day. She really feels like the Harmony MC of version 3 with just how flexible she makes her super break options. That being said though, don't sleep on the usual Amphoria's powerhouses. Cyrene buff Mighty, Godslayer be Gods have so much crit damage attached to them that they just brute force through the stage debuffs. Cypher has her handy store damage reduction mechanic to help with skipping phases, especially useful here since enemies get harder to kill the lower HP they are. Otherwise, you can't go wrong with the tried and true strategy of pumping as much crit damage into your DPS as possible and eking out a slow but steady clear. There really isn't all that much HP on this knight to worry about, at least comparatively speaking, and the stings are a huge reason for that. Wave 1 is a pretty straightforward layout. The Sun and Moon elites make their Wave 1 return from both Kafka's MOC and Lygus' Anomaly Arbitration, possessing 1.54 to 1.82 million health. Between those two extremes, their HP is somewhere in the middle, leaning slightly towards the lower end, making them a decent but not an impossible challenge to overcome. As for Wave 2, True Sting has 50% more health than the last time it showed up in MOC, though that was all the way back in 3.4, so hopefully your account should be strong enough to not feel the effects of that too badly. The stings are also decently tanky, though this also means that their death damage, which scales off their max HP, is raised to match, making this fight fairly straightforward as long as you can keep killing them. I discussed these elites at length in my Lygus Anomaly Arbitration guide, but pretty much you want to kill the Noontide Gryphon's eagles as fast as possible to remove your sun marks and prevent the eagles from occasionally doubling one of those elite turns, which is possible since thankfully, unlike Anomaly Arbitration, they're not at 1,000,000 HP each anymore. While the Moonlit Pegasus is the slower of the two, it's definitely the more threatening of the bunch, with all of its marks capable of entangling your allies. If left alone, it's thankfully much easier to deal with since it's slow and the moon marks can be dispelled by ulting. No matter who you choose to deal with first, make sure you focus one over the other, as both elites share the trait of being a lot less threatening when isolated since their mark application speed basically cuts in half. You're probably familiar with how the True Sting works by now, but just in case, its first two turns involve attacks inflicting wind shear that is just slightly weaker than the Ascended's wind shear, paired with spawning 2 juvenile stings that can also inflict wind shear and can spawn copies of themselves if left alone. True Sting's turn 3 then unleashes a single target attack that triggers every wind shear on that ally, followed by either its usual AoE, or more summons if it's the only enemy on the field. Phase 2 instead starts off with a single target attack, and adds a lesser sting to the usual juvenile spawns, which inflicts double the vulnerability to its allies if killed, but also outrage to your allies if you let it kill itself. Turn 2 has a True Sting inflict an AoE and charge up, releasing a powerful attack on turn 3 that gets stronger the more stings there are, and removes all CCs from any sting on field. This is followed up by another single target detonation attack, though if you're playing this fight right, this turn shouldn't come up more than once, if even at all. And last of the nights, Night 3. Remember when I said that Shielder should be safe for this stage? Yeah, that's because every single enemy here rewards you for having shields up. The Sweet Gorilla's attacks deal max HP and defense down to itself if landing on shields. The Arumaton Grizzly doesn't perform its second attack on its second turn if hitting a shielded target, which I had no idea about until doing research for this video. And Ichor, Memosprite, of course, is Ichor. Interference, our favorite debuff after dealing with Hule, is back, but honestly, it's the tamer of the two, especially considering how taunting can basically remove Ichor's vulnerability state. As such, the ability to deal damage in quick bursts is useful healer as well. -1 speed setups are much harder, unfortunately, as they'd be ideal for this type of scenario, but I will say that if you're willing to stomach the RNG and speed tune like -10 or something instead as a buffer period for the action delay, it's definitely still doable. Off-turn action advances or nukes like our newer supports have, though, is nice, but be careful of, say, an extra attack from Cyrene adding that last hit count needed to push Ichor above the rest of your roster, especially given that every attack beyond the 6 will also advance everyone's action completely. If you're not able to deal huge nukes, it might be better to lean fully into the attack spam playstyle instead, since breaking Ichor deals 20% of its max HP, and all of its actions contribute towards breaking itself faster. Results will generally be poorer though. And with that said, the best counters are often able to do both. Ichor's counters compared to MOC are largely unchanged, with only Anaxa seeing any real detriment due to wanting to keep Ichor broken as long as possible for uninterrupted single target deletion, which comes in direct conflict with his double skills. That being said, this really isn't a problem with his best team that lets him cheat out more skills by cutting ahead of Ichor and launching 4 uninterruptible back-to-back attacks. I'll admit it's pretty funny to see Fei Xiao and Hunt March on relatively the same level thanks to the Break DLC, with both not being too far behind the blast options in terms of viability. Sustain-wise, either grab a shielder, or someone that'll let you tank the big nuke in this fight better. Not much else to say for the shield stage. Supports-wise, any good single target performer will do, with Silverwolf opening up break options and Cypher opening up earlier kills. A lot of best-in-slot supports nowadays come with their own toughness damage to help with breaking as well, but do note that it's a bit of a double-edged sword. After all, more attacks means more advances for more damage, and less time spent in the weakness-broken state. Wave 1 here is slightly less tankier than the Knight 2's Wave 1, doubly so when you consider the utter lack of CC and the max HP bleed the hounds inflict on death. Quite a few physical ice and imaginary weaknesses to take advantage of, a pattern that persists onto the boss. This version of Ichor is, on paper, a bit weaker than their MOC counterpart, but being able to recover from the weakness break a whole cycle earlier than they normally do, plus the bonus action delay on every attack, makes them much harder to deal with in practice. Since I've already done a boss guide for Ichor, which you can check in the description, I'll just touch up on the basics again with them. But before I do, Wave 1's elites. The Sweet Gorilla attacks every turn while cycling between summoning 2 Bubble Hounds, locking its toughness, and doing nothing else on its big attack turn. If its attacks land on a shielded enemy, each bottle deals about 4% of its max HP, or roughly 65k, along with reducing its defense by 20% for 2 turns. The Bubble Hounds are pretty simple, just launching single target attacks and inflicting bleed on death, with both powering up the more they get hit. The Automaton Direwolf is even simpler, with turn 1 being a single target hit with a chance to bleed followed by a single target lock-on. Turn 2 has it attack the locked on target with 10 lower chances to bleed, followed by another single target hit if that target was not shielded. While 10 bleed stacks sound scary, they have like 0 scaling, so don't expect them to deal that much damage. Now onto the boss. Earlier we saw that it has 480 toughness, which is hard to brute force, but luckily Ichor can reduce its own toughness through killing its pheasants or having its single target attacks land on shields. Note that the self-inflicted attack damage cannot break its toughness, allowing you to set up for insta-break plus nuke scenarios if you know what you're doing. The pheasants that it summons, somewhat like the Mirage Fizzle Kid, spend one turn to charge all non-CC'd pheasants, then the next turn has them all attack a single target. Thankfully, their additional damage is a lot less. Phase 1 has Ichor perform single target attacks each turn during its 3-turn cycle, followed by summoning 2 pheasants for the first 2 turns and an additional AoE on the 3rd turn. The 3rd turn hits especially hard, so make sure you have adequate sustain to handle over 3000 damage coming to one of your characters. Phase 2, as we all know and love, starts with an AoE and 2 more pheasant summons, followed by that notorious guillotine attack that, well, if you didn't want a shield before, you almost definitely want one now. It is worth noting that with Sustainless Break being much stronger with the Dolly's release, it's way more feasible that Firefly can be built to tank one of these straight up, even with the chip damage accumulating over the run. The next 3 turns repeat that of Phase 1's turn cycle, and that whole 5-turn sequence for Phase 2 continues repeating until Ichor is defeated. And finally, King in check. After all that work defeating the Knights, surely the King must be even worse, right? Well, let's start with the debuffs, all 3 of which are new this time, which thankfully means no extra damage taxes tacked onto ally or enemy attacks. The first is depowered, reducing most characters' starting energy to 0 and gutting their off-turn energy regen. Quite convenient that this doesn't affect Firefly, whose 50% energy trace overrides this debuff, as well as characters that don't use conventional energy systems. If I can be blunt, this really sets back Rappa a ton when normally this would be her dream matchup, as pushing back her first ult by 2 to 3 turns makes her non-functional for quite a significant chunk of time. It almost feels targeted, so as to let the favorite breaker reign supreme. But speculative biases aside, the next debuff, Resilient Armor Plus, which is fittingly an upgrade from the Resilient Armor debuff seen in previous Anomaly arbitrations, adds more effective HP to characters who for some reason might not want to break Sunday. Fugue also becomes a higher priority, as reducing Exo Toughness to 0 does count as 1 stack of damage reduction being removed. This is probably worse for Remembrance teams, who like not breaking Sunday and having shields prevent their HP loss, but realistically 45% damage reduction just levels the playing field for them, and should they spec into breaking, they are scarily efficient at it, as we'll see soon. And if that wasn't enough anti-break hate, the 3rd debuff, Unending Refinement, makes each attack taken further lower damage and crit damage received, up to 20% damage and 40% crit damage taken. Honestly, it's not a lot, especially considering that it resets upon the target being broken or restarting their turn, but it definitely does push towards the break-centered playstyle. As for the buffs, Break by far gets the strongest piece of the pie, with 60% break effect and 15 to 60% stacking break vuln. For comparison, generic attackers either get the choice of 40% attack with another 20% added on per train attack, which is a very slow ramp up, or a 40% damage boost and an Anaxa-like implant of their element after every attack. While the implant is really good and lets even off-element teams engage in this break-focused fight, it's undeniable just how much of a boost Break gets here compared to everyone else. And well, unsurprisingly, the way to beat this fight just boils down to breaking Sunday. In this fight, breaking you gives a shield for 1916 HP across the whole team per main boss bar break, prevents them from acting, and removes his damage reduction mechanics if you remove the whole thing. So it's your sustain and damage enabler. So the more you break, the more powerful your team becomes, especially since racking enough shields opens the door to sustainless clears, an explosive jump in power compared to the previous Anomaly Arbitration King of Check rotations, where sustain was all but mandatory. A mix of AoE and single target damage is good, with phases 1 and 2 favoring the former and phase 3 the latter. Blast and AoE perform about the same here, especially given how most AoE nukers nowadays have a slight single target focus, and blast support between Mayday, Aglaya, and Firefly, for example, has been quite generous as of late. To absolutely no one's surprise, this fight was 100% tailored to serve Firefly, arguably to a larger extent than Quieter due to the negative start of battle energy debuffs that affect almost every other standard energy character but her. Heck, even Dahlia's bonus energy is fixed, so that doesn't get affected either. And in that vein, any on-element DPS should be able to thrash Sunday with Dahlia assistance, as well given how break-centric this fight is. Otherwise though, pretty much every Amphoria's DPS should be able to handle this fight well, given their unrestricted access to the Cyrene RMC comp that churns out good amounts of AoE toughness. Heck, even Evernight has a 30 toughness AoE ult along with her Memosprite attacks, a toughness threshold normally reserved for single target ults. Sustain-wise, it really depends on what you want. AoE toughness, Lingsha. Non-break offensive power, either Dan or Hyacine. Skill points, Gallagher does just fine given how many free shields you have access to. Past that point, I don't think sustains are really recommendable, given how you should have access to at least one of these options as well as the ability to run sustainless. Something especially recommended when there's a real lack of annoying CCs to worry about versus Sunday either. As mentioned earlier, both the Dahlia and Cyrene with their respective MCs form quite the solid support core, after which it's up to you to decide what other combination of supports lets you deal the most toughness and damage. Tribby is an interesting AoE option if you can get Quantum Weakness on the field, likely via the Seize a Moment blessing, and Cypher especially stands out for AoE teams that face a brick wall when going up against a single target stage 3. Silverwolf might also open up some interesting options, but compared to other break supports, it's hard to justify her, especially since there's not 2 other teams worth of supports you need to think about filling in, and there's a buff that lets you implant anyways, albeit without the res down. With that out of the way, let's break down Sunday's stats. Surprisingly, his total HP is quite low, only being roughly double that of Night 1's HP, and thanks to the free shields on break, his overall damage output ends up being much lower, an advantage to all but Remembrance teams. His stats are very similar to his Echo of War form, having 10 more toughness per bar on phases 1 and 2, for a total of 210 across 3 break bars to break, an identical 35 times 9 toughness on phase 3 for 255 toughness total on that phase. The minions on the side, the Echoes of Shared Dreams, each have 30 toughness, share the same speed and weaknesses as him, and have slightly lower res and max HP. Note that max HP doesn't matter for stuff besides break bleed calculations since they possess shared HP along with Sunday. The mechanic for this fight is of course the Astral Express. I couldn't find exact numbers, so let me know if this is a bit off in the comments, but from what I've observed and going on the wiki, the attack, also known as Horizon's Echo from Afar, costs let's say 160 energy to charge. Each action or break refunds 8 energy, and at the start of the battle it's 33% charge. Damage wise it's quite negligible, but the 60 AoE toughness is obviously very useful. 1 breaking the Echoes, including their exo toughnesses, and dealing considerable damage to Sunday's toughness. Phase 1 opens with the pretty standard 3-turn rotation. Turn 1 is a single target attack followed by charging. During the next turn, any non-broken Echoes will each deal about 1000 damage to a random target, making it pretty lethal if you somehow choose to ignore breaking them, so yeah, definitely take care of that at some point. Afterwards comes a pretty standard AoE attack. Turn 3 then falls with a single target attack and a very funny 200% base chance to put one of your allies to sleep for 2 turns. Short of CC immunity, you are going to sleep, no questions asked. It's not really that bad though, as the Alien Dream Sleep only lasts for 1 turn effectively, can be cleansed, and is dispelled upon taking any hit, at the cost of taking 50% more damage for that hit. The Echoes are more annoying than actually threatening, with a minor 5% delay attached to their single target hits. Considering that they start off delayed by 50 to 100% though, it's not rare for them to barely act at all this fight, and should you run a -1 speed comp, it probably won't be too bad. Moving on to phase 2, Sunday uses his big AoE, Tempestoso, immediately upon phase change, which should ideally eat at your shield and not your HP bar, since it's about 3000 AoE damage when all the Echoes are left unbroken, which they are since it's the start of the phase. Turn 2 is yet another single target attack, followed by a charge that comes accompanied with a 30% damage boost, 75% damage reduction, and toughness lock on the main head only, plus a shield for the whole boss that soaks up 1/8 of his max HP. Turn 3 then comes with another AoE and another charge that leads back into Tempestoso. Finally, for phase 3, you know the drill. Sunday charges for 7 turns, with each turn set to happen right after your DPS in the action order. Note that you can advance ahead of this with, say, immediate turns or enough action advance, though you'll have to wait for Sunday to actually go behind the DPS before doing that. And on the 8th day, or turn, well, Sunday unleashes his huge nuke. Most teams should have broken enough bars to have enough shields to tank the attack, but if not, well, it's usually instant game over, seeing as this attack deals 7500 AoE damage, ignoring defense. So unless your name is Maide or you're an HP scaler, there's no shot you can tank this straight up. With that, that's all I've got for this Anomaly Arbitration. Surprisingly, though not going against the consensus here, I do think that the Knights are more challenging than the King this time, given how Sunday is an element restrictive to Axis' break mechanics, his lower shared HP and damage output compared to Aquila last rotation, the ability to run sustainless versus him more so than the other Knights, and something that's much harder to say for Knights 1 and 3 especially, and of course, the ability to bring any team without having to worry about a stage 2 or 3. That being said, the spike in Knight difficulty more than makes up for the King being a much easier win. Oppressive mechanics, from bloated elite HP to basically removing Ichor's vulnerability period in favor of his 50% damage reduction period, make clearing with full stars much harder compared to just your average MOC 12 run. Compared to previous rotations, which I'd say were more so MOC 11.5 difficulty, these stages in my opinion range from MOC 12 to MOC 13 difficulty, which does not bode well for the upcoming version 4 meta. After all, last time we got a super break enabler that opened the door for underdogs like Hunt March and even Jing Yuan, who by the way is being used here again by certain fans too. The HP ceiling rose to match the rising DPS floor, and considering how Firefly's specialty is versus those higher HP enemies with less favorable mechanics that require quick breaking for survival, plus a built-in sustain accommodating trace on the Dahlia, there is a real incentive for Hoyo to make content harder if they want to push Firefly, other premium break DPS, and other newer DPS and supports forward, especially as we enter a new version. We're already seeing loads of enemies that advance themselves or mechanics that do so for them, with oppressive mechanics or damage checks paired with that can be disabled or stalled if the enemy is broken. And between the latest MOC, featuring 2 single target walls, including a Sam with over 11 million HP, Pure Fiction with wave 3 mobs crossing the 1 million HP mark, and Apocalyptic Shadow with a crazy 14.7 million shared HP on Bananas compared to less than 6 million on its last rerun, I unfortunately believe that the Night 1 bloat is just the beginning. That being said, keep a lookout for version 4 characters and enemies. It's certainly going to be interesting how the meta progresses from here. Thanks for watching, and happy holidays.